Okay, so welcome along everybody to our writing circle on writing your research discussion. We had writing your research results last week, so this is a good link to that one. All right, and of course, yes, my name's Kerry, so thank you for coming. So just to begin, QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders' laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning, and QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. All right, so today's resources will be up on Blackboard. I haven't put the slides up. I know I usually do by now, but I haven't because we just need to create a, excuse me, a new section for this one. So if not this afternoon, they'll be all already in the morning. If you really want them desperately, just email me this afternoon and I can email them to you. All right, so our goals for today. So we're looking at the purpose and the structure of your discussion chapter, and we're looking at synthesis and critical analysis as well, or critical discussion. Two of the key things that you need to do, of course, in your discussion chapter. And as everybody most likely knows, we have workshops and writing circles in our program. Of course, this is a writing circle where we look at exemplars and you check your own writing. And the workshops are more theory and principles of a writing practice. And the writing circles generally add the practical part on. So just to get you thinking, can you jot down just for yourself one or two research gaps in current knowledge that you're working on, and one or two of your research aims? So we will come back to these. I'll just pop it in the chat for you. So we'll come back to these. This is just to get you thinking. I don't want you to be too passive. I know I do talk a lot in the session, so it's good if you can be actively thinking at the same time. I've just got another note there to put your student ID number if you haven't already, if you've only just joined us. All right, so today's session, we've got our welcome right now, of course. We'll look at the purpose and structure, critical discussion. We'll examine our exemplars, and we will have time for a Q&A. So hopefully you've got your draft discussion handy. If you do have one at this stage, it's for your own use. And as we said, we'll be examining exemplars. I'll upload the exemplar sheet shortly, so you'll have that. And just a quick reminder that I often give you, everybody that's here today probably has heard me say this 100 times, but if there is someone that hasn't come recently to a writing circle, I've just circled your candidature there because that's where all the questions are about the administration of your degree. So go there first before asking too many questions. Most of them will be answered there, but then you can always contact the GRCs, of course, as well. But those 6 tiles there for the research student pages have so much information, pretty much most stuff that you will need. All right, let's go with some key terms. So as I said, we did have writing your research results writing circle last week. So just in these first couple of slides, there's a little bit of an overlap there for in case someone who didn't come to that one. So we just looked very quickly at some research terminology. So the research design is the whole study, the sequence of your steps. Methodology, of course, is around your philosophy of how new knowledge is gained. So you might think it's qualitative, meaning we have to talk to people and get really rich data of people's experiences, or potentially you're a quantitative researcher. So in that case, reality is measurable and we're using experiments and surveys and controlled observations. Methods are how you're obtaining your evidence. And I've just a little note down there. If you are doing surveys, you should be referring to the survey respondents. And then if you're a qualitative researcher, then you've got participants. That's the sort of rule of thumb for that terminology there. So, as always, keep in mind your research aim. So every chapter or section, you know, it really needs to be contributing towards those research aims, right? You know, otherwise you've gone off topic. If you need to give background information, of course, that's fine, but you tell the reader, you know, this is background information so you can understand A, B, and C. And the data analysis stage, it's really the starting point to the answers that you're trying to find to answer those research aims and, of course, your research questions. So just bear in mind that, you know, you don't have to wait for you to completely finish your data analysis or even your data collection before you can start drafting something in your discussion section or chapter. So we looked at this quote quickly last week as well. I like this one about wrestling with the data. So it's not linear, you're going backwards and forwards all the time, and you're integrating that evidence with the literature and current research and current practices. So we talk about this as well, about the thesis being a narrative. Okay, so with these writing circles, I've had writing your introduction, your lit review, your results, your discussion. There's methodology next week, which will be a new one. So that is all part of a thesis, isn't it? Whether you're by publication or by monograph, you're still going to need something around those chapters. Potentially, if you're by publication, it won't be exactly that every single chapter, but you still need that narrative and that story and to lead the reader through. And it's debatable, I suppose, but I would say that the discussion is the high point of that narrative. You know, it's the bit that the readers are waiting for. Everything up until now has led to this discussion. So keep that in mind about that thread that goes all the way through the thesis, no matter whether you're by publication, monograph, or any kind of thesis, really. Okay, we always talk about the connections between the chapters, which of course links to the idea that, you know, you're writing this narrative. So with your discussion chapter, obviously it links with your results, you state what you found, and then the discussion explains what it means, you interpret those findings. And it also should mirror to a lot of an extent to your lit review as well, because remember the lit review, of course, is the previous studies and the current body of knowledge, and then you're adding in the discussion and weaving in previous studies and the current body of knowledge. So bear that in mind, and we will talk about structuring shortly, but one of the things you could potentially do is structure your discussion similarly to your lit review, if that works, similar to your results maybe, because they're connected. That might be good for the reader. So that's something you can think about as well. So with your ultimate readers, your examiners, so they really want to see that you're engaging with the empirical evidence that you've found and that you've presented, and you can't go beyond that. So be really careful about not having too much of a jump. Make sure you can really use your evidence to underpin, firstly, your findings, of course, and then you're also using the literature to help to support your interpretations as well. Of course, you know, that note about examiners are annoyed and distracted by presentation errors, and good presentation makes the reading enjoyable. So that's pretty, doesn't seem anything odd, does it? Goes without saying, really, but that will all come back to your proofreading and getting the feedback on the readability and how it's all looking. All right, let's get into our purpose and structure of this discussion chapter. So we'll have a look at the purpose, what we need in it, combining results and discussion, difference between discussion and conclusion, the structure, getting started and staying on track. So a little bit to get through. So as I said before, I feel like the discussion is your research destination. It's where we're headed through the whole thesis up until now. What do you guys think? Pop in the chat if you disagree. It's not wrong to disagree with me, by the way. You know, we could say, okay, well, really the conclusion is because it's where you gives a recommendation. So I could say that would be true, but where are you getting those recommendations from? From what your interpretation was in the discussion. So, you know, you've got all those previous chapters saying, hey, there's a problem, to, hey, this is what I've found to help solve the problem, and potentially, of course, the research gaps as well to help fill those. So it really is a very good progression as you go through. You've given them the results, and now you're giving them, well, what do those results mean? Yeah, Lee John, good in the chat there. I feel like the discussion can merge with the conclusion. Yes, we're going to look at that in a sec. And sometimes it's hard to separate them. Yeah, it is. We'll have a look at that I think in 2 seconds. But I also want to point out that last dot point is really important. Is, again, the discussion is the culmination of all your research skills that you've learned up until now. Remember, you're doing a training degree. You're training to be researchers, and you're going to end up with this beautiful narrative that's going to provide contributions to a body of knowledge. So the discussion is where you're pulling everything in that you've learned, and then you're putting it out there for the reader. So let's have a look at the purpose of the discussion. Last week we saw this slide where we said the research findings, you're presenting and describing them without bias or interpretation. That's really, really important. You need to present the results because they don't prove anything on their own. And then the discussion will come, and that's where your interpretation is there. That's where you're really nailing the value and significance and saying where your research fits into the literature and the research field. So really important that they are separated. We'll talk about that in a second as well. But the purpose, to analyze and interpret the empirical evidence that you have gathered and analyzed. So don't do the interpretation when you're presenting. If you find that you're saying, oh, the survey showed blah, blah, this suggests something, just be very careful. That might have to move to the discussion section. And we'll have a look at why in a second. So what are you putting in the discussion, right? You're demonstrating your skills as the researcher. You're demonstrating your critical thinking. So we want previous studies as part of the context. We want your research problem and aims need to be in there as well and linked to everything you say. And of course, the research field as a whole. So there's a difference between a few previous studies that you're going to pull out and the research field as a whole. So remember, you need both of them. Yeah, similar to this study, different to this study, but the research field as a whole is also something that your study needs to be placed within. Of course, you're going to answer the research questions as well. Don't forget about that. And you're setting up your conclusions and the implications and the recommendations that you're going to make. And also, don't forget, we usually at the end in the conclusion say, hey, I found all these great things, but we still need more research into, you know, A, B, and C. So that's planting the seeds for that as well. And also, within your discussion, never, or any of your chapters really, but don't forget your stakeholders. Always talk about how they're going to benefit. It's all very well to say there's a research gap and there's a research problem and we need more insight, but why? For who? Who is it that you're improving practice for, or whatever it is that your contribution is going to be? You really need to be explicit and say who and how will it benefit. A lot of things, isn't it? Oh, that's the next slide. Okay. So some of you might know about the Thesis Whisperer. She's a lecturer from ANU. She's a worldwide phenomenon. She's great. If you Google her, you might like a lot of her stuff. So I pulled this out. It's quite interesting. The discussion chapter is the problem child of the thesis, the chapter most likely to provoke fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Not everyone writes a chapter called discussion, but everyone has to do discussion bits. I like that bit. The discussion section is scary because you have to make new knowledge claims of your own, not just agree or disagree with other people. Without knowledge claims, you don't have a thesis, just a report of work that was done. So I haven't put this here to scare you, quite the opposite, rather to say, yeah, this is hard, right? So, and also to remind you that you have to have a contribution. Of course, this is why I think your discussion is your culmination. It's the high point, right? It's where the reader wants to get to, and they're looking forward to that. So your knowledge claims are what you're asserting using your evidence, of course. So even though it is a lot that you need to put into this discussion, you know, you've got this. You're the one that knows your data the best. You're the one that knows your study the best. You know, you will find the answers. It might take time, and I know that that's frustrating when you're going backwards and forwards and thinking, I don't know what I'm seeing. You know, so if that's the case, you really need to have those critical discussions with anybody that you can, because the light bulb will go on. All right, but be confident in your past self who designed a really good research project. You know, you've gained feedback and you've implemented it now. Your critical thinking skills, you've been refining those. And as I said, you know your study and you're beginning or already becoming an expert in your field. So yes, there's a lot to do, but I really want you to be confident. You know, don't lose that confidence, even if it is taking time. All right, just write what's in your mind, what your thoughts are, and you will get there. And yeah, remember, it's a PhD, not a Nobel Prize. So yes, you need to do well and you need to find something, and you will, but you're not necessarily curing cancer. Some of you probably are, but not all of us can do that. So let's simplify it a little then. We've talked about all the things that you have to do here. If you're moving backwards and forwards between what you found, what other people have found, the similarities and the differences between those, and within all of that, you will find something that is new and significant for your problem and for your research field. All right. And you're going to find the answers, of course, to your research questions or your hypotheses, whichever one you have. Seeking feedback, I always talk about this, and you know that this is super important. Don't rely on your supervisors. Find some other people that you can get to help with your reading your drafts, family members, friends. You need to be able to get in the reader's shoes. And I know it's scary to give someone your work, but you know, any feedback that they can give is going to help the readability. So be specific about what you want feedback on, of course. And if someone comes back and says, not getting it, it's not clear, you can't really turn around and say, oh, it is. It's clear to you, but it wasn't clear to them, so you'll need to fix it. So just breathe. Don't necessarily respond straight away to supervisory feedback. If you think it's going to be a lot, have a look, shut the computer, and then come back the next day. So we were talking about the differences between your results and discussion. We looked at this last week as well, because it is really important. You cannot combine them, okay? You can combine them in a chapter. You could probably even combine them in a section maybe, but you need to be very clear about the distinction between. The reader needs to see your evidence presented so that they can also make some judgments as well, right? They may not agree with your interpretation, and that's okay, but you're going to do everything to convince and persuade them and show your evidence that your interpretations are correct, but they still need the opportunity to see it without the interpretation first. Whatever it is that you're going to do with the structure, just let the reader know at the start. We'll look at some examples soon. So Legion was saying in the chat, sometimes it's hard to separate them. And it is really. Some people will have a discussion and conclusion in one chapter. One of our exemplars does today. So as long as you keep remembering, the discussion is explaining what you found and interpreting, whereas the conclusion is completing the whole study. So you're restating the major findings and you're making it extra explicit and clear. This is the contribution. This is the future research direction. So yes, there's an overlap, because in the discussion, you will be saying, this is the interpretation, this is what the research findings mean. And then you basically underline that and highlight that again in the conclusion. Remember your conclusion too, there can't be anything new. So just by that, it's going to be repetitious in some ways, and that's okay. You know, you're pulling all those findings and saying, okay, these findings mean this in terms of the significance of my findings, and then here's the next thing that we need to do to gain even more insight for future, what future researchers need to do. So again, they would need to be in different sections, but they could certainly be in one chapter. So let's have a think about structure. We've talked about purpose, all the things that need to be in there, and, you know, so let's think about how we could potentially structure it. As I said before, maybe the lit review can give you some hints, because you would have thought long and hard about how you're going to structure that thematically, chronologically. Maybe you've got a framework, maybe it's around research questions, whatever it might be. That could be something. Maybe the same as your results. Maybe you're putting your results in discussion for each research question in one chapter and then a second chapter. Maybe it makes sense to go thematically, conceptually, answering the research question. So my advice would be, try one. Just think, okay, I'm thinking this, try it, see how it goes, get some feedback. You might have to go to plan B or C or D. All right, completely normal though. And the thing with structure is the content will still be there. You'll just need to realign and maybe add a little bit here and there. So as we said, you know, you could have traditional introduction, lit review, methodology, results, discussion, conclusion. If you've got mixed methods or multiple phases, maybe that's a way that you might like to structure. As we said, maybe you're responding to the research questions. If you're doing thesis by publication, maybe you have a number of studies, and each one is explained in your articles. So how you pull those out or connect those articles, you know, that'll take a little bit of thinking, but it's all possible. And one of our exemplars today is by publication, so you'll see how they looked at it. It's actually the same ones that we looked at last week, by the way, for those of you who were in the results writing circle. All right, yeah, so we're going to look at some examples. We'll look at the tables of content. It's a really good strategy is double checking your table of contents regularly, because it needs to be really clear, right? It should really lead, the reader should be able to look at your whole table of contents for any chapter or the whole thesis and have a really good idea of what your study topic was and how you undertook the study. So this is example 1. Now, if you remember, if you were in the class last week, so the title of this thesis is Risk Factors Associated with Infection in Patients with Chronic Leg Ulcers. And this is the one that's by publication. They had 3 methods and 3 results chapters. So you can see here, chapter 8, study 3 methodology, chapter 9 was study 3 results. And then you can see, I don't think they had a publication for this study 3. It was probably in the works at the time. They probably had it almost ready to go. But then you can see there, chapter 10, discussion and conclusion together. So that's something you could potentially think about. Regardless of whether it's by publication, it's still, you probably wouldn't have 3 methodologies though, but you might separate your results. Exemplar 2, so it's qualitative and monograph. Thesis title, The Impact of a Social Cognitive Teaching Strategy on Students with Learning Difficulties. Now, this one had 4 results chapters based on the topics 9.2, 9.3, 9.4, 9.5. So their discussion is based around the way they structured their results. So there was a chapter on self-regulated learning, a chapter on academic self-efficacy, reading comprehension, and the community of inquiry. And then chapter 10 is the conclusion chapter. So you can see lots of different ways. Go into ePrints, by the way. I didn't keep that slide in. QT ePrints, you'll find plenty of examples that might help you. All right, so strategies to get you thinking about what you are going to put in this discussion chapter. So initially, write a big list of everything that you've learned, you know, during your data collection and analysis. And you could be doing that from the very beginning of that process. Any thought that pops into your head that might end up being a contribution. Another thing, potentially you might have made a table around for your lit review and previous studies. So you might be able to add to that to say, add in your results. Or if you didn't do that for the lit review, that's okay. You can make up one now, but sometimes seeing everything in that table form or a figure or a mind map can really help you. So if anyone has any mind map software or apps or anything they've been using that they've found helpful, pop it in the chat. It's always helpful to find out those things, to really get that thinking going. And then, as we keep saying, you've just got to keep analysing over and over, pull out any themes or ideas, remembering that they'll need to link back, you know, because for your whole research problem, and also they'll need to link to your research aims. Thanks in the chat. I use Miro for mind mapping. Fantastic. Someone might like to try that. But I think this initial period for you is just getting your thoughts down, writing some draft paragraphs. It doesn't matter if they're not a whole paragraph, but just getting your thoughts down. You can tidy them up and you can work out the structure later. But I really, really would say don't try to sit down and write a perfect discussion in even a month. Okay, yeah, start as soon as you can. It's going to be messy, but it'll all come together eventually. Someone else in the chat has said, I love scapple. Scapple, is that how you say it? S-C-A-P-P-L-E. Maybe it's scapple. All right, so getting started, I keep saying, just write your ideas down, write dot points, start answering the research questions. If you can write a 1 sentence, 2 sentence answer to your research question, that's going to give you a really good start. And as always with this discussion chapter, or however you're doing it, you have to give a paragraph at the beginning to remind the reader of what you were trying, your research aims were, what the aim of the section is, and also the structure of the discussion. Oh, good. Thank you. The Miro is in the chat, the link. Perfect. All right. Let's have a little look at some examples of these beginning paragraphs. Now, maybe don't write the beginning paragraph yet, or maybe do, but don't write the structure part. Maybe start with your aims or whatever you think sort of needs to go in there. But yeah, you will need to have this at the beginning to orientate the reader. It's really essential. So this one is from a mixed methods thesis. Chapter 4 gave the survey results, then discussed those survey results because they informed some case studies. Chapter 5 was case study participants and interview data for the first phase. And then you can see here, and it also responded to research question 1 in chapter 5. This is chapter 6. This chapter presents the findings from the phase 2 structured interviews. This phase of the study focused on the academic socialization level of the research framework and examined blah, blah, blah. The first section provides a summary of this for each case study unit of analysis. Second section reviews the final results. This is followed by a cross-case analysis and discussion of the main findings, and it provides insights into whether the expectations reported in the previous chapter were fulfilled, and it concludes with a response to research question 2. Right, so what's that? 7 sentences. Not bad. It is telling us a lot of what we need to know. What's in the chapter? What did this phase focus on? The first section does something, the second section does something, then we've got our cross-case analysis, and we're going to respond explicitly in this chapter to research question 2, and it's been presented there. So something like that is going to be pretty useful for your readers. The only thing I would say is maybe we need to know why we're reviewing the final results for their semester 1 courses, like what was the point of that? But maybe we already know from the other chapters, and I'm sure we'll find out later. All right, let's have a look at, oh, yeah, so there we go. So the yellow is saying what's, the structure, and then the green is saying why these things are happening and how they link. All right, here's another one. This is from our exemplar 1. Oh, I need to pop the exemplar up for you guys. Let's see. All right, so I've just popped it into the chat. You should all be able to download that. And you can actually see this is on page 3 if you wanted to go in and have a look at it in there. All right, so example 1, so remember that's the by publication quantitative. This chapter discusses the key results from the 3 studies and examines the key findings in consideration of the existing literature. Okay. So remember, each study had its own methods and results, didn't it? So 2 chapters for each of those 3 studies, and then we're now in the discussion and the conclusion together. Each study was guided by specific aims and research questions, and all contributed to the overall aim. Nice. So we've got the whole aim in there of the entire, which makes sense because we're now discussing. The focus of this work was blah, blah, blah. The goal of study 1 was to do something. And then they link to phase 2, study 2, study 3. There's a lot of phases going on, isn't there? I'll try the other way. This chapter first discusses the contributions, the strengths and limitation of the research are also examined. So one limitation, I guess. Finally, the theoretical and practical implications for practice and future research are addressed before a series of recommendations. All right. So that's pretty good too. We've got our overall aim in there, which is so helpful for us as the reader, and we know what to expect. It's pulling all those 3 studies together, right? I don't mind this little, the goal of study 1 was to do something and these were tested. It's good for us to get a reminder, because don't forget, as the reader, we would have had 6 chapters to read, plus this is by publication. There would have been journal articles too. Good question, Jenna, from last week. I can give you the link for the slides from last week. Someone's just asked in the chat for the slides from last week. They're on Blackboard. Yeah, I only just realized about 15 minutes ago that I need to set up a whole new section for this one, this writing circle, because it's new. All right, so example 1, I think as a beginning paragraph, I feel like it's pretty good. Let me just get back to where we were. Okay, so that's on page 3 of that activity sheet. All right, let's have a look at exemplar 2. So it's qualitative and monograph. Now, the heading is chapter 9 discussion, and then this is the first paragraph. So it basically starts by saying this chapter discusses, interprets, and evaluates the findings with reference to the literature. Yep, good, that's what a discussion will do. And then it begins by telling us exactly what he's doing in every section. So that's there. Then this is the continuation. Then he's got a subheading 9.1, introduction to the discussion chapter. I'm not a fan of subheadings that say introduction in a chapter that's not the introduction. What else could he do? If he wants to have that 9.1, potentially have no heading, no subheading for the introduction. It could have realistically gone straight after this paragraph, but that's okay. All right, so the study was initiated because of my interest and concern for children with learning difficulties, a concern shared by many teachers. My experiences also confirm teachers work hard to meet the needs of all students, but necessarily must implement educational programs that are effective for the majority of students. The factors contributing to students' difficulties with learning are complex. By the way, I took the references out to give us more room. Okay, and then he's listing the problems they may have. Then we've got emotional influences on learning, especially relevant in the early years of schooling. Interesting, because his study is around primary school. So pulling in all the things to justify why he did what he did. 3 relevant requirements and emerged from the literature. The first was a need for reading skills, the second and the third. Accordingly, this is a need, there is a need for an intervention approach, which he did, that integrates both cognitive and emotional factors as proposed in the research questions. All right, so I think that's pretty good too. What do you guys think? Again, a lot of information, okay, but I feel like we need that. You know, what if we just come to this discussion chapter and we haven't read everything leading up? I think we would have a fairly good idea of what's to come, wouldn't we? So, and well, how do you feel about the study was initiated because of my interest and concern for children with learning difficulties? Not unusual in qualitative, and we can take a guess that in his methodology, he's talked about researcher bias and how we would minimize that sort of thing. Excuse me. And what else has he got? Yeah, so he's got a lot about the factors there. So we've got a pretty good idea about, you know, what's going to come, isn't it? We know what the subheadings are most likely going to be. Someone says, does interpretation and discussion need much reference? Yes, in some bits, because you are placing your research into the context of previous researchers. So in this beginning chapter here, he's citing previous researchers who I would assume he's going to cite further down below, and he's just summarized here. So previous researchers have found emotional influences can have an extensive impact. Early years, he's got quite a few references in there. And they would have already been referred to, of course, in the lit review as well. So the point really here is that beginning paragraph or paragraphs need to be good and need to set the reader up as if they haven't actually read what's been before. So just take a minute now. I'll just give you 2 minutes. Go into your own chapter or whatever sections you've started, and even if you haven't written that beginning chapter, maybe you can at least put in a couple of dot points to potentially remind yourself that you want to talk about the aim of the study and the aim or the function of the chapter, right? That could be in all one sentence, like the exemplars we just saw, or not. Really remind the reader Not necessarily. It depends whether you're mixing with or not mixing, but presenting it in a similar chapter as your results. Figure out how much of a reminder the reader needs regarding how the data was collected and analyzed. They may not need it. You might have just told them a little while ago. So that's something to think about. And also, you might not know how the section is structured yet, but make sure you leave a note for yourself to do that. So I'm just going to mute for a second, oh no, not a second, 2 minutes, and let you guys have a look and make a few notes in your drafts. So just to finish up the structure and purpose, to stay on track, just write. You know, writing is a product of our thinking, blah, blah, blah. I know I tell you this all the time, but, you know, don't do all your thinking in your head because you'll forget. Think onto the paper. You know, and it could even just be, you know, saying something like, this is a left field idea, but maybe something. And at least if you have it written down in a notebook or in your draft or whatever it might be, it's there. And you can delete it if you need to later. But, you know, I don't know about you, but I forget. I have a brilliant idea, and then unless I write it down straight away, I can forget it 2 minutes later. So, yeah, maybe you're a bit better than that. I hope so. All right, so write down everything, you know, trial that structure, trial it, see how it looks, and of course the content. Have those big, well, not necessarily big, but have those critical discussions where you really pull apart these, any chapter really, and not only get track changes from your supervisors, but have a discussion and talk and say, this is my thinking, and they'll say, okay, not quite clear enough, make it more explicit, or whatever it might be. And also they're going to raise questions that you hadn't thought of, as will your peers. I know that my peers were amazing for me. You know, we'd go for a coffee, we wouldn't take any books or computers, and we'd just talk, you know, I'm thinking this, and then they would be coming from a completely different perspective and often have some good ideas. So, and also make sure that you keep checking that the value of your research and your contribution is being explicitly explained. And as we said before, remember, one thing that the examiners won't like is if you're speculating, and you know, you really need to have that evidence to support everything that you say. Don't go off topic either. And you know, as I said before, trust your previous self, and that all that hard work that you put into the lit review and designing your study and collecting the data and analyzing the data, you know, you've done so much. Trust yourself and just pull out as much as you can, and you will find what you need ultimately. It just might take a little while, you know, so don't give up. Hang in there, be confident, and you know, put in that thinking time, but write everything down. All right, so the discussion, 2 of the key things that you'll be needing to implement as far as writing practices go is your critical discussion and your synthesis. So we're going to look at the original and significant contribution. What does that mean? We'll pull apart those concepts, critical analysis, synthesis, and looking at balance and some phrases. And then we'll get into our exemplars. We're pretty much running on time, which is good. Right, so ultimately you need to find an original and significant contribution. Now, don't be overwhelmed. Remember what we said before. It's not a Nobel Prize, it's a PhD. So just because you found something and it's small, it can still be significant and new, something that nobody else has found before. So don't try to think that, or don't think that you need 100 things. You don't. You only need a couple, right? You're one person. You've only had, only 3 years, or if it's you're doing your MPhil, 1 year potentially. You know, so we're not expecting you to solve world peace or anything huge like that. Okay, it's about, remember what I said. Keep in mind your stakeholders. It's about them, and they will be important for a particular reason, and your research will be important for them. So be brave and trust yourself and underpin with the evidence, which will then lead to your conclusions, of course. You've got your research questions, you know, so by answering those, that's going to be your contribution. And also don't forget, not everything has to be new. Okay, you are going to find things that other people have found before. So you'll be supporting your field and supporting the literature and the current body of knowledge. You're just going to add a couple of extra insights that extend that body of knowledge. So remember we said what a knowledge claim was, and that's what you're doing in your discussion. It's an assertion based on evidence. So are they going to believe your contribution? Are the readers going to trust you? Well, yeah, because you've already set them up to be trusting of you because you've been explicit, you've justified everything, you've given evidence as to the fact there's a research problem and then there's a research gap or more than one gap. So you've done all that hard work. That's what I mean. Trust yourself. You've done it. Your research design, you've justified it. You've said it's robust, it's valid, it's reliable. It's all the things that a research study needs to be. That's what I mean by don't second guess now. You've done all the hard work and it's led you to here to find that significant and new contribution. So again, what does this remind us of? It tells us about the idea of that whole narrative, doesn't it? All the way through, you are building the readers or the examiner's trust as you're writing by being explicit, being clear, explaining everything, justifying everything, and using the evidence as well. So don't forget, validity and reliability are really important. So validity of a research design is about the accuracy of how you've collected and analyzed the data. So the accuracy of your measures. Have they collected what you wanted them to collect? Reliability is the consistency. So if I was to do your exact study, would I find similar results? Okay. Come along to the methodology writing circle and we'll talk even more about those things. All right, so what's your contribution going to be? You should have a little bit of an idea by now. You might not know exactly, but you should have a little bit of an idea. So is it new methodology to gain new perspectives? Is it cross-disciplinary and you've using a different approach but an existing research field? Is it something about theory? Are you examining stakeholders that have been neglected in the past in terms of a research area? Have you got new empirical evidence to inform the debates in the field? Maybe there's contention within the field and you're going to add to help release some of that tension. So write in the chat now, which one are you potentially aiming for? If you're not sure yet, that's okay. But think about your research questions. Think about your research aims. This will be an extension of that, right? Anyone brave to put something in at this point? You know, is it about you know, you're contributing to methodology in your field? Is it theory? Is it practical? Is it a different way of doing something? Is it to help the environment? Is it to make things cheaper, make a process quicker? Oh, cool. We've got a few in the chat. Awesome. Contributions to theoretical approach and improved practice. Great. New methodology to gain new perspective isn't in an existing research area. Better understanding of how night lighting is used by clinicians in hospital patient rooms. Yeah, so that's about practice, right? Improving practices and practices to do to health. Pretty important. Transdisciplinary approach to review the energy market, right? Good, yes. As it to renewable energy, great. Yep, so changing practices, I guess, practices in this case of wholesalers or retailers, ultimately aiming to create more efficient legislative framework. Great, okay. See, so everyone has something, and you're going to contribute something that's significant and new, but don't be scared by that, and don't think it has to be something massive and world-changing. That's most likely not going to happen for most of us. We're not, you know, Isaac Newton. So, you know, don't be scared, be excited would be what I would say. All right, so remember at the beginning, all those minutes ago, we talked about having you jot down some research gaps related to your study, your research aims as well. Is that going to help? Those research gaps, that's going to help to fill you're helping to fill a research gap. You might have evidence already around those research aims. So these are good starting points for your knowledge claims, right? So just take 2 minutes again, go back to your draft that you have, and just make sure that you leave a note that somewhere in there you need to refer to your research gaps that you've flagged in the lit review, and then you will explicitly say how your findings help to fill 1 or 2 or however many you have. And then also thinking about your research aims, make sure that you have some evidence in there related to your research aims. And, you know, your research aims have probably come around to help a research problem. Okay, so you really need to make sure that you have explicitly discussed how you're filling the research gaps and how you're fulfilling your research aims as well. All right, I'm just going to switch off for a couple of minutes. So really the point here is that these things here, the research gaps, the research aims, the research problem, they are going to be the starting point that are going to lead to your new and significant contribution. So really keep that in mind. If you're beginning to sort of tear your hair out, you will get there. So critical analysis and synthesis, let's have a look at them. So I guess I've noticed that sometimes I'm saying critical discussion, sometimes I'm saying critical analysis. I'm meaning the same thing, okay? But basically your critical analysis is you're pulling everything apart and analyzing it. So each piece of evidence that you've found, you're going to pull it apart, get your better understanding and make judgments about what that piece of evidence actually means by itself. And then the synthesis is what that piece of evidence means in relation to all your other evidence and the current knowledge in the field. All right. So if you sort of think of it as, and you can see they overlap, right? So critical analysis is pulling apart and analyzing and making your judgments. And then synthesis is putting it all back together again in a clear and explicit discussion that involves your evidence from previous studies, and of course the body of literature and the body of knowledge as a whole, right? So your evidence will be similar and supporting or different to other previous studies. And then what does this mean within the research field as a whole? So don't forget to do that last bit, right? You can definitely start with the previous studies. Think about the studies that you talk the most about in the literature review. So they would be the ones that you're pulling across for your discussion. But don't forget, you're talking about the research field as a whole as well. Okay, so don't forget to go a bit broad. And actually also thinking about your discussion, remember we were saying how they linked, the discussion linked with the lit review. When you're writing your discussion, you are potentially and 100% likely, I could almost say, to have to go back and add something to your lit review or change it slightly. Completely normal, right? Your literature review is a living document, particularly if you get some findings you weren't expecting. That happened to me. My case study participants wanted to talk about everything except what I wanted to talk about. And so I couldn't really ignore that. Excuse me, could I? you know. I wanted to talk about reading and writing. They wanted to talk about their experiences with the other students, with the teachers, you know, which of course I was investigating at those as well, but that was the main thing that they wanted to talk about there, you know. So I had to go back to my lit review and adjust it, and then, you know, and it worked out fine in the end, but it was stuff when I was writing my literature review initially that I hadn't really focused as much on. And then when the participants wanted to focus on that, I did need to go and adjust my lit review. So if that happens to you, perfectly fine. And a really good practice to be aware of both chapters at once and making sure that they link and almost mirror each other. So critical analysis, you're examining your evidence that you've already presented, and the aim is in here is for the reader to get the deep understanding that you have as well, right? So what have you learned from the research? So for each research finding or result, we need to say what those results mean. So make sure that there's nothing in your results that's not discussed later, right? And vice versa. Don't discuss results that you didn't present. So see how they need to align as well. And, you know, you're making judgments about how your results fit, as we said, with previous studies and the field in general. So you're examining, interpreting, making judgments. So those judgments that you're making need to be explicit and clear and supported by the two bits of evidence, the evidence from the literature and then your evidence, of course, as well. And then that is then going to answer the research questions. Now, as well as doing all of this analysis and being very clear and explicit, and this is what the findings mean, we're beginning to plant the seed, aren't we, for the next step, the next progression, which is the implications and recommendations that you're going to make potentially in the conclusion. But you can definitely start alluding and making those statements. Therefore, this means something should happen. And then your conclusion will then be explicit and say, this something should happen and it can be achieved in this way. All right. So there's that link. So let's have a look at an example again. So this was from last week. You might remember it was an example of presenting results. So you can see the last section of the survey asked 2 Likert scale questions related to expectations of teachers. There's the, there's a mistake there, very true and not true are both 5. I don't think that's going to work. But yes, so it should be not true is 1, slightly true is 2. All right, so we got our figure, and then look down the bottom where there's an explanation of the figure. Remember we said last week, if you have a figure or a table, you have to tell the reader what it is you want them to see and what you want highlighted under it. So 3/4 of respondents indicated very true or fairly true that they expected course teachers to tell them what to read. Interesting for university students, right? So that's been highlighted. 3/4 of respondents said, I'm not going to read anything unless my teacher tells me to read it. Around half of respondents thought it was very true or fairly true that they would have one-to-one time with their teachers. Now I'm talking lecturers here. They think they're going to get one-to-one time with their lecturers. So these figures corresponded with the results presented previously, which revealed that many participants expected to receive support from course teachers if they needed help improving their academic reading or writing. Okay, so there's a comment there that links this figure and this evidence with previous evidence. So remember, this is presenting the results. This is a results section. Let's have a look at what it then looks like. So you can see there, I've taken that bottom bit and I've put it up the top. So in another section, this is the discussion that relates specifically to those results. When academic staff provided encouragement, it enhanced the participants' learning and increased their confidence in themselves. As Wingate explains, seminal author in this field, Teachers are the experts in the discourse community and can provide invaluable support for first-year students as they transition into their new learning environment. Showing interest and kindness, offering assistance, are simple teaching strategies, but they can have significant influence on new learners' feelings of belonging. So quite a few interesting phrases there: teaching strategies, feelings of belonging, new learning environment, discourse community. So that's all vocabulary that's clearly coming from the Lit Review, and is applicable to the field. Appreciation of teacher support has been reported in previous studies, which have shown that positive engagement with teachers is an essential part of first-year students' academic socialization and construction of positive student identities. Therefore, right, so remember, this is the discussion, yes? Therefore, it is essential that academic staff understand the critical role their classroom practices play to promote learning, development of academic literacy skills, and just as importantly, a positive transition into university. So see how it's all summed up. Now, what would happen next? So this is the end of the section, let's pretend. So in the conclusion, what do you think is going to happen in the conclusion? What sort of recommendation could potentially come from this? Making sure that academic staff understand the critical role their classroom practices play? Potentially, yeah. And giving recommendations as how that could happen. Well, how could that happen? Professional development, potentially. So see how this is a really good example of planting the seed. You know, we don't have to give, maybe there could be another sentence. This means professional development for academic staff is appropriate or needed or whatever. Yeah, so that could be another thing to add. So we're going to look in a minute about the balance. So how much do you put into the discussion? How much do you put in the results to plant the seed? And that can be tricky, but, just my biggest advice is in the results. If you feel like you're discussing too much, you probably are, pull it out. Just plant the seed. Just give the reader a little, and then in the discussion, give them more, then give them a little that's going to help them head towards the conclusion and the recommendations. Who are the stakeholders, do you reckon, in this too? It's really the students, isn't it? They're the ones that are being investigated and examined, but ultimately their experiences rely very much on the other stakeholder, which is the teachers. Who's a third stakeholder? The university, right? So you will have something like that as well. You have your participants who are your stakeholders, but you'll have peripheral stakeholders as well that you'll need to keep in mind. What's their role in this? So make sure you keep that in mind through the whole narrative as well. One of your stakeholders could be the government, if you're looking at the way, the way something's done in health potentially. So keep those stakeholders in mind all the time. All right, so we've looked at the critical analysis, right? So hopefully you can sort of see that in the discussion. We'll look more in a minute. Synthesis is bringing it all together, right? Current knowledge, how does your research advance that knowledge? What are your findings? What's the new insights? So being really explicit about that. And moving back and forth between what you found and what previous researchers have found. So as I said, they do overlap, critical analysis and synthesis, but you need to do both, okay? So do the analysis, pull it all apart, what you found, what does it mean, and then bring it back together with your synthesis. All right, so let's have a look how that works. Oh, this is the exact same paragraph. Yes, sorry, I did redo it. So critical analysis is making our judgments based on the evidence. Synthesis is bringing it together. You could think, you might have highlighted slightly differently to me, and that's okay because, as I said, these two things overlap, right? So sentence one is critical analysis. This is what the results presented show. Okay, Wingate, as I said, seminal author, so we're bringing her in is a good thing. She says teachers are the experts in the discourse community. They can provide invaluable support. Support that the students wanted, didn't they? There's a few things about some simple teaching strategies that can be used. Who would have thought showing interest and kindness could be a good thing? So previous studies have found this as well, and therefore the academic staff need to understand the critical role that they play to do those three important things, which are potentially themes, right, through this whole thesis. So that's what I was saying before. It's about that balance in the discussion and all of your chapters, of course. But in this one, yes, you're definitely finding that balance between your voice. We need your voice in there. We need sentences that do not have a citation, right? That's your voice. Then the next sentence uses the literature to support what you found. And then that's going to be your research contribution and your answers to the research questions as well. As always, tense is one of my bugbears. So I usually include something about tense. Tense is usually, we can usually figure it out what the tense is going to be, but sometimes it does get a little bit tricky if you want to have simple past and simple present in one sentence. That's what I see a lot. Cannot happen, right? Something can't be in the past and happening now as well. Simple past tense means it happened in the past. It's done, right? So that's why when you talk about what your participants did or an experiment that you did or a survey, you have to be in past tense. The participants reported. They just did. They reported it in the past. But then when you want to say what your interpretation is, then you can be in present tense, but you cannot mix the two. And you usually want to be in present perfect when you're talking about the literature as a whole. Present perfect is an awesome tense because it means it happened in the past and it's still happening now, right? As opposed to the simple tenses. If you want to know more about tenses, go to Blackboard, and there's a really great resource there that is about tenses and using them in your thesis chapters. So if you're thinking, what the heck is she talking about? Go and have a look at that. Or email me. That's the other option. Okay, so the Manchester Phrase Bank, I don't think I mentioned this last week. It is brilliant. You must go on there. It will help you so much for every part of your writing, for your discussion. Here's some examples of some phrases that you can pull out. It's not, why reinvent the wheel? You don't need to. Yes, you want to mix it up. Of course, you don't want to have the same sentence over and over, but Manchester Phrase Bank is really handy. Just Google it and you'll see. The result is significant because these findings verify previous studies. A similar conclusion was reached by. In contrast, previous research has found. Note the tense. The findings revealed in this study provide evidence. Yep, so that's wrong, isn't it? That tense, that was a trick for you. The findings revealed in this study have provided evidence. Just that note down the bottom too. I know that you're using your critical voice, but try to avoid subjective words like interestingly, the findings showed blah. Might be interesting to you, but it's not really academic, isn't it? Why don't you say significantly, the findings showed something, or importantly? Okay, use those academic words is much better. Righto, let's examine an exemplar. Yay. That's enough of me talking. So, as with last week, it doesn't matter if it didn't come last week. Basically, we had two exemplars. We had a quantitative and we had a qualitative. So I would like you right now to pop into the chat which one you want. And I will, you're going to read the exemplar and write a few notes. I'm going to give you time to do that. Then you're going to pop into the breakout rooms in your groups and discuss it. So I need to know which qual and which quant you want. So thank you to you guys who are putting that in the chat. In the meantime, let's go to the next slide. Right, so you're going to examine an exemplar. So now that you're selecting it and you have the activity sheet, just pop into the activity sheet and just start to read whichever one you're wanting to examine. Exemplar 1 starts on page 3. So at the moment, everyone's qualitative. Yeah, everyone's qualitative. This is what happened last week, and that's okay. There's a few of you who haven't said yet, though, which one you want. But once you've decided, pop it in the chat so I know. And then you're going to read. I want you to notice as you read. You are the reader, right? I want you to notice the language. I want you to notice, can you see critical analysis? Can you see synthesis? Can you see research aims? What is it about the readability that's good or not good? And then I'm probably going to give you 10 minutes, to be honest, to read initially. And then I'm going to pop you into your breakouts. So don't stress. There's no right or wrong. All right. So yeah, we have got a couple of ones. Well, I've actually got Legion and Amanda. You both said you'd be happy to go to exemplar 1. I'm happy. Look, if you all want to do exemplar 2, I don't mind. This is your choice. So we've got Leah, Amanda. Anyway, I'm going to be quiet for a minute and let you read. And if anyone hasn't decided yet, I'll give you a note. All right, so main takeaways for today is start now, write everything down, see that you don't forget anything. Remember your aims, your problem, your questions, really keep those clear in your mind, write them, print them, plaster them everywhere. So, you know, it's always at the forefront of your mind. And as always, you know, we need to lead the reader through, explain the structure, keep reminding them about everything that's come beforehand, you know, your methodology as well. And what we're doing is leading towards the conclusion, the recommendations, and the implications will lead to those recommendations. I think everybody's put their number in the student number in the chat box, so that's great. All right, so as we always do in these sessions is we ask you just to take a couple of minutes to just let us know what you thought about today. This is a little bit of a new writing circle, as in I used to do results and discussion together. I've separated them out so that we have much more time for the exemplars, and I think that that's a much better option. It does mean, of course, that you've got to come to more sessions. I know that. But really the exemplars from my perspective are what's really going to solidify to you the writing practices that we're looking for. So but anyway, if you wouldn't mind using that QR code or the link that I just put into the chat, that would be fantastic. I do read everything and do my best to respond and make things better. You'll be interested. Right, so if you are needing to find people to give you feedback, remember how important feedback is. We have the HDR writing peer feedback sessions. Please come along. They certainly are a great opportunity for you to get feedback on your draft. And also, the more you read other people's drafts, the more you'll learn about your own writing, what's good, what's bad. So, you know, a really good opportunity. I try to have 2 or 3 a month-ish. So you can see there's one next week. I think the 23rd is actually a Monday, but I normally have them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I do try to mix up the time, sometimes midday, sometimes 10 o'clock. So please come along if you haven't already. I know a few of you already do, and I'm happy for that. So of course, as we said, today's resources will be up on Blackboard. I will email you guys with all the information and the links. If it's not this afternoon, it will be at some stage tomorrow. All right, I promise it'll be there, and you will receive an email with all that information. Amanda's asked in the chat, are the peer review sessions better for post-confirmation or when working on confirmation? Either one, Amanda. We have people coming who are in stage 2. The way it works is I do try to pair you up with somebody who's potentially from your field or at a similar stage, but I can't always do that. And what we find is the people who come to the peer feedback sessions, they're engaged, they want to be there, so everyone's supportive, and yeah, come before, is the short answer to that question. Basically, we do try and avoid bringing results as such, because that can sometimes be a little bit difficult to give very much feedback, especially if it's really technical. But again, you bring what you need to bring, you know, and we'll make sure you get some feedback. Coming up, there's a thesis by publication workshop on tomorrow. Some of you might be interested in that. There's a writer's lounge on Thursday where you do writing sprints and get some of your draft writing done. And next week, engaging your reader writing workshop. So a little bit of overlap with what we did today, because a lot of what we're talking about for engaging your reader is critical discussion and synthesis. So, you know, that's always going to be the way with these sessions. There's going to be some overlap because when I'm talking about writing practices that you're implementing constantly. But yeah, that one's a good one. There'll be plenty sort of activities as we go through, and more chance to engage with your peers, of course. As always, look at that HDR Matters email that comes to you. You know you can curate it to what you want. Everything's on high queue. And yeah, there we go. So just a few minutes left, but please, any questions, pop your mic on. Pop into the chat, anything you'd like to say. Let me know how you went in the breakouts. I still haven't managed to get enough time for us to then review it together, the exact words. But the thing is with those exemplars is there's no right or wrong, you know, you see what you see. And by seeing me go across and highlight things, yes, that's going to be helpful, I would say. But I just feel like you guys talking yourselves is really going to be, you know, you're more active, which is what I want. Okay, so yeah, keep working after the session. Now, if you want, with that that activity sheet. All right, so thank you everyone again for coming today, and I will see you all again soon.